Welcome, everybody, to the Depths of Motherhood podcast. I'm your host, Danielle. Well, actually, today I'm not your host. Nina is our host today. Welcome, Nina.
Hello.
Oh, so let me just tell you a little bit about what's happening today. So I realized that I hadn't fully told my birth story. I hadn't shared the experience all the way through. And now I've started sharing birth stories within this podcast where a mother comes on and shares. That's the full episode. I decided that I should do that for myself to fully go through the whole experience. And Nina is going to sit and be the host and hold space for this. And Nina and I have been friends for, I think, 3 years. I think we've known each other for 3 years.
I think so. We
Yes.
don't quite remember. It feels like forever in a good way.
It feels like forever. Yeah, we started to connect when I think it was the beginning of lockdown, just before I got pregnant, a few months before I got pregnant, like properly connecting when you came on the podcast that I had at that time. And then from there, we've been inseparable. And online, though, we've only ever met online, but it feels like, oh my gosh, it feels like we've known each other forever and that we've been on retreats together and everything, because we kind of have. Every time we meet, we're doing something to do with spirituality or going deeper into ourselves, or it might just be, hey, today's really sucks for me, and I know that Nina's going to be there and she can support me, and vice versa. So thank you, Nina.
Thank you, Danny. We're at the women's circle as well as the Depths of Motherhood. Both of them, they're amazing spaces, and I help out with the women's circle, so I'll be behind the scenes doing things. So yeah, I've been helping out on the women's circle now for 2 months, I think. Not that long.
I feels like, but you've been really helping out since it began, because it wouldn't have been possible if you weren't there.
Yeah, lots of ideas going back and forth and proofreading and being like, Danny, you spelled this wrong in the background. So
yeah, and if you still see mistakes, it's not because Nina hasn't seen it, it's because I've been putting stuff out before it's gone through anyone. And I'd like to say that it's all to do with my phone obviously not picking up on what I want to say, and the spell check being really bad for some reason, but it's actually my grammar. I did not do, like, English was not my thing in school. So it's interesting that I spend a lot of my time writing and talking.
You still get your story and your point across, and like you always say, it's the intention behind it, isn't it? So who really cares if there's the odds, word spelled wrong? It was when she spelled her own name wrong once, so that was impressive.
You're like, wow, you've really like peaked right now.
but we just blamed that on breastfeeding, so that was fine.
I'm gonna be breastfeeding for the rest of my life, apparently, if that's the case. Okay, well, Nina, what do you want to know?
Well, just where do you want to begin this story of your journey? Well, was it when you got pregnant? And because at that point you weren't even in Costa Rica or France, you were in where you are now.
That's true. Well, so I can do a very fast recap of what happened originally. If I close my eyes, it's because I'm thinking of memories of what happened. So I was in Guatemala at Lake Atitlan, and I was on this month deep meditation, dream work retreat. And I met Elon in a coffee shop. Our eyes met, and it was literally like a movie. Like, I was sat with my friends and he was sat across the room, and his eyes were just like, wow, so dark and big, and I couldn't take my eyes off. And I was looking at him while I'm chatting to my friends. And then when I left, I said goodbye. It was really random. It was like we'd had this communication, and I said goodbye. Like, we just cut the communication. I was walking away. And then I didn't think anything of it. And then I saw him again, actually, at an ecstatic dance. And we sat on this, the edge of the dance floor, which was overlooking the lake. And honestly, I don't know what we were talking about. I couldn't even hear him, but I was just being polite and like nodding, like, yeah, that's so nice. That's so nice. Then he said, I'm going to go to the toilet. And he left, and he didn't come back. And I was like, okay, again, probably not going to see him. Then I saw him again in another coffee shop. He walked past and saw me. And then kind of that's what happened the whole way through whilst I was in Guatemala. I was bumping into each other and realizing that this is going to happen forever. So we may as well just make some dates up and hang out with each other. And then we did. I finished my retreat. I moved into his place. And then from the moments we've been inseparable. And it's been like, them moments were so intense for me because I realized that my life was changing, like, and I resisted it. So there's so many times I was just like falling apart and just like crying on the bathroom floor because I kind of like resented him that he was taking me away from my retreat center in France I spent so long building up. And yeah, taking me away from everything I knew. I was blaming him. I was totally in a victim like role. And then I started to have an awakening and opening my eyes to everything, all my choices that I'd made, and yeah, where I wanted my life to go. So we actually ended up going to Canada, trying to get back to France, but it was during COVID and the flights and everything it was such a hard time trying to get anywhere at that point. Remembering back to the beginning of when the pandemic started and nobody knew what the hell was going on. So I ended up staying in Canada, no TV. And then, yeah, I think it was like 4 months later, Araya came along. But it was interesting because I decided to go on like a full body detox, and I was doing lots of womb work at that time, as you can remember. I was going through my cycle and understanding what the seasons meant. And well, anyway, I think I just became really, really fertile and open to receiving. I was doing lots of meditations at that time, like for hours a day. And then, yeah, I missed my period and we went to the shop, picked up a pregnancy test. I sat on the toilet, did a pee, and there were the 2 lines. And I was like, oh, righty then. This man I just met like 5 months ago, I think he's going to be the dad. And in my mind, there was nothing, like there was no, we're going to have this baby or no. It's just like, oh, the baby's here. Like we have a baby come in. And he didn't see it that way. It was really tough for him because he had big dreams with his work and everything that was going off there. And so there was a resistance. And that was the battle for like a few months, was him wanting to have an abortion and me wanting to have Araya. And actually it was interesting because I felt like I was going to live my mother's life again, where she was a single parent. And I was kind of like stepping into that. I was like, I can do this. I'll be a single mom. Like, it's fine. And so there was parts of my subconscious like coming through of how a family's raised. And then something happened. I had some spotting at around, I think it was like week 10 or something like that. And I told Elon, and it was the first time I saw some kind of surprise on his face, like a worry. And so we went to the hospital and I had a internal ultrasound, which means they put the ultrasound scan in your vagina up towards the cervix. And this was the first time I'd experienced this. I had an awakening to what the medical system was like, because for one, he just told me to get on the bed, take my pants down. He didn't give me time to like get ready, cover myself up. And this was a male doctor. He didn't explain to me what was happening. He didn't prepare me in any way. And then he inserted the ultrasound scanner. And the crazy thing was he also took a phone call in between. It was so crazy. His phone started ringing and he was like, took this phone call. And I was like, okay, well, I'll just lay here with my legs open, like, don't mind me. And then he left the room and the nurse was just stood looking at me, like not even communicating, just like staring at me. And it was so uncomfortable. And I was like, this isn't the way it's supposed to be. Like, this is not how pregnancy should be. This is not the care that women should be getting. So
Where were you at that point?
I was in France, so I didn't really speak the language so well either,
I
you know?
thought there was the language barrier, yes.
Yeah, so I was just like, okay, like, do you like my vulva? Like, that was like my feeling at the time, like, what's going on? But Elon couldn't even come in. So, but the one thing that came from that was there was a fear that arose in Elon, and he really was able to drop into this idea that he's going to be a father. So that's the only good thing that came out of that scan, and that it gave me this like insight to the business of birth. And I started to then watch documentaries, reading, like I watched The Business of Being Born. And have you watched it, Nina?
No, I haven't. I've read lots of books with you, but I haven't watched.
Yeah, like, you know, everything, like, anyway, if you never watched that documentary, you know everything that's going on anyway, just from what we're talking about. But it was the first time that I'd ever heard anything about this. about one intervention leading to the other, you know, like doing things to support the doctor, not to support the mother, and it really being like medical centered care instead of mother centered, baby centered, family centered care. And I was like, oh, like I'm getting all this information now, and I'm like 10 weeks pregnant. Like, surely someone should have told me before. And I also realized from other research that these scans that they do, the internals, to be avoided because they can interfere with your pregnancy as they move closer to the cervix, and can, you know, and it's very sensitive space. So if anything's touching the cervix, it can actually lead to early pregnancy loss from these interventions. I didn't know this. My mum did though. She told me afterwards. Like, okay. But I think she was just worried that something was happening. So it's like, go in. But
Yeah.
actually, if that was happening and I was having a miscarriage, if this happened to me now, I would just give myself the space and the rest to go through whatever process was happening, because they couldn't save the pregnancy anyway. If I was miscarrying,
No.
they wouldn't be able to there. So then anyway, it was crazy because once I opened this up, I also met a woman in my area who'd had 2 home births, and she started to tell me about home births. And I was like, aren't home births like old school and like dangerous? Like, this was my mindset at the time. And I thought, oh, you know, she's just like risking her life and her children's lives. So that's wild that was like 3 years ago I was thinking this. But that woman and her conversations and her sharings of her birth experience helped me then to explore more. And then I realized France wasn't going to be the place for me, because they didn't support home births actually. And there was no one in the area who could come and be with me to support my birth. And so that's when we decided to move to Costa Rica. So I'm just going to jump to that. We got to
Yeah.
Costa Rica, amazing. Amazing walks on the beach, talking to you a lot of time on voice message, doing yoga, meditating, learning about how to have a how physiological birth works, and how interventions can just cause a spiraling effect to lead to an assisted supported medical birth. And I had a really great pregnancy. I loved it. I felt great. It looked amazing. Like, it looked the best I'd ever looked, like my whole life. It was awesome. And me and Elan just felt so strong. And did anything happen in between then and then? I decided I didn't want any more scans. I was like, I'm not going to have any more scans. I didn't go to any doctors. I'd been following a lot of free birth and indie birth, and that really helped me to feel confident in my abilities to birth. But there was an extreme, actually. I decided I'd push everything away. So we went to Costa Rica, that we'd have a midwife with us. But I got to this point where I decided I didn't want anyone there. And I think it was more of this cocooning and caving. I didn't want anyone around me that I didn't know. And I decided Elan was going to be my doula and midwife, and I was going to teach him everything that he would need to know. And we felt very comfortable with that. And we also knew that there was like a medical center close by if something happened.
Yeah, I remember speaking to you about this, and you were saying again about the language. You didn't want to happen, you know, what happened in France to repeat itself. And yeah, but you were very sensible in the fact that we're going to try it on our own, but we know that there is that support there.
Yes. Yeah, I felt really, and it's good to do this because sometimes I'll wait till I get to the end of my birth story to say what I'm about to say. But yeah, I was very confident. Like I was so in touch with my body. All my moments were spent with my body, with Araya, meditating with Elan. Like, it felt great. So then I can't actually remember like how many weeks I was at this point. I kind of lost track. And actually, the cat that had decided, Tiffany, one of my friends, her cat decided to move in with us while she went away. And the cat, we didn't even know, gave birth in Araya's cot on the day that I was due. So the cat gave birth. I think it was like 4 kittens. So there's pictures of me with these little kittens on my pregnant belly
Very
just
cute.
before. So cute. And that was like so interesting for that to happen at that time, because it was like such a pregnancy birthing space. And then, so when I went into labor, I was up until like 1 o'clock one morning, and I was just like, I was tossing and turning, and I wasn't in discomfort, but I did realize I was causing arguments in some way. Like I remember back, I was trying to push Elan away also with something that I can't remember like what it actually was, but there was definitely the sense that I wanted to be alone. And then I started to have a twinge. And I said, oh, I think it's happening. But it wasn't like I was never afraid because I didn't know what to expect. Like I didn't know what this was going to be. So I was just like, oh, it's happening. Like I literally imagined that I would just go in a squat and she would pop out. I was like, yep, we're just gonna decide and she's gonna come out. That's it. And then so this went on for a long time. And
So can I just ask, so what were your hopes then for the home birth? It was just to have you and Ilan and that
yes,
coziness, was it just?
exactly. I just wanted me and him, the baby, to come out, to have a lotus birth where the umbilical cord stays attached to the placenta. And that was my vision of just being with that, like just natural, just like no assistance. And then I actually felt it was going to happen pretty much all the way through, because so many women don't like to call them contractions. There's like words like surges or waves. For me, I felt comfortable saying contractions. It felt fine for me. I didn't get triggered by it. So I started having them. And then this lasted, let's say 12 hours it was happening, but they were very close together from the beginning, like every 5 minutes. And I was like, oh, maybe I've been in labor a lot longer than I thought. But they were fine. Like I could breathe through them. They were intense for sure, but I could breathe through them. And it just felt like I was getting closer to Araya. And it was so beautiful because this was early hours of the morning it started. And then when it got to the nighttime, I put the candles on and I was like, just relaxing and watching the contractions and watching her move and seeing her drop lower in my belly. And I was just very happy with what was happening, really comfortable. And then it started to get more intense. So like 28 hours later, it was really intense. It was like, I can't even describe. Like there was one point where I was like pushing my back, like the base of my pelvis onto the wall, and that was really helping with the pressure. And it's interesting because the memories are really foggy now. I remember trying to lay on my side. I was trying to fall asleep sometimes because I was so exhausted for doing this for so long of not sleeping, and I was trying to stay hydrated. At one point, Elin said, "Do you want a coffee?" And I'm like, "Are you kidding me? Like, coffee?" I mean, maybe it would have worked. And then I started to, like, my mind was coming into play, like, okay, so I need to start getting into some positions because she must be coming. And I feel that because I didn't have the support of a doula or a midwife to hold that space and remind me just to surrender, I was too busy trying to control the situation by certain things. So I got into a position which was working. It felt like it was like something was happening, and I inserted my fingers and I could feel Araya's head. I could feel her. And I was like, oh, great. Like she's got to be coming soon. And so I chose to stop pushing. There was something in me that wanted to push, but it wasn't from my body. It was from my mind. And this was exhausting. This was really exhausting for me. And it's so funny what goes out the window from like what I learned to being in that situation, because actually what was holding me was a fear as well. There was fear that arose that I don't think would have been there if there was a midwife or a doula. Like it could have definitely still been there for sure, but there were some things that I would have just needed a woman to look me in the eye and say, this is okay, just breathe with it,
That
And so,
reminder to hold
yeah,
space and breathe, like you said.
exactly, just like that reminder. And then I could just go in with it. But I felt like I needed to be like fully active in some way. So I started to do these positions. And then after a few hours, she was still in the birthing canal and her head was there. My waters hadn't broke at this point either. Like I was so confused with that. I was like, how can I feel and our waters are broke? But the waters don't have to break. I was just really thinking, I was so locked into this pathway of what was going to happen. And then I started screaming. Like I was screaming so much because of the pain that I was experiencing. And it was putting me to sleep. So every time I would scream, I would be passing out in between the contractions. And in the moments where Elon says I wasn't breathing, because I think I was hyperventilating. So I'd be like, scream, take a deep breath in. So I think my body was fully oxygenated, that when the contraction stopped, I kind of just passed out and stopped breathing. And then I was having these like visions of stuff that had happened to me in my past, like sexual trauma experiences, experiences where I didn't feel safe, some experiences that I don't think were even mine. And then I would wake up from them because the intensity of the contraction would bring me to, and I would say something relating to what I'd seen in the vision. And that was kind of scary for me. And I didn't understand this like opening that happened during childbirth, where all the doors and windows are open and you're like in between worlds and you're dropping into your subconscious and so much can come up. And it's actually really beautiful. Like it can be it's super healing. Like it's things that come up to be healed. But I didn't know this. No one told me about these experiences.
It
And
must
it
have
was
been quite scary for Elon as well, though, that you were stopping breathing and passing out, and he's thinking, I'm not a nurse or a doula, I only know what Danny told me.
exactly. And I think he disconnected a bit because he had to be there and he didn't want the fears to come in either. And there was, when I was screaming, became very conscious about how much noise I was making. So I realized I had this thing inside where I'm like, I don't want to take up space. I don't want to make noise to be seen. So there was a lot of subconscious beliefs that I had about my existence. Not at the time, I wasn't thinking this at the time. This was like on reflection, like I don't have time for that. But I realized on reflection that when I started screaming, I thought there was something wrong. I associated screaming with that there was something wasn't right. And now I see that that's not true. Like we scream and we shout when we're giving birth, and it's okay. Like it's okay for that to happen. And actually what someone told me was when we scream really high pitched, is to take the energy up away from the perineum to stop it from tearing. So then when we go lower again, then the energy moves downwards. So it's a way to, because when a baby comes out, it goes up and down, up and down. It's really just getting that space ready to stop it from tearing as well. And so, but in my mind, I was just screaming, and would someone hear me and what would they think? And I'm supposed to be having this home birth and look at me. Like there was so many insecurities came through that I could see and hear. And I said to Elon, like, I need some support. So he called the transport to the emergency clinic, and he came, and it's so crazy because I didn't care that I was naked, and I was just like, I'm not putting clothes on. And he's like, the whatever it was called, the guy who comes to get you, he was like, put some clothes on. I'm like, I don't want any clothes on. Like I'm giving birth, like I don't want clothes on. To me, it was just seemed ridiculous. And so I did put something on. I can't remember what it was. Got into the back of the vehicle. And it was funny because I felt an almost safety just being in there. Like part of my subconscious beliefs that a medical system is the safe space was still much within me, even though the back of the van was bouncing so much on the like Costa Rican roads and I had no idea what was happening. There was some
the
kind
van
of
like
peace.
an ambulance sort of thing, or just a transport vehicle?
It was an ambulance, but it was like not an ambulance, not the ones that we're used to. It was just like I don't even know, like a farmer's vehicle or something from what I can remember, like a military truck or something, like a military van. Oh my God. And they're like the whole time they're like, you need to lay down, like laying down on my back. And that was so uncomfortable. Anyway, we got to the emergency clinic and it was light by this time. And there were so many people in this tiny room, like the size that I'm in now or something, like so small. And they put me on this bed and the doctor looked me in the eye and he says, you need to stop making noise or your baby's not going to get oxygen, which is not true. But I believed him. He looked me in the eye and basically told me I was going to hurt my baby if I didn't stop screaming. Trying to tell someone to stop screaming that's all that they feel like they need to do is crazy. And I remember like coming round, because there's a point when you give birth, it's called transition, when basically you're becoming more conscious of your surroundings, you're becoming more aware of your surroundings. And it's because when the baby comes out, so you can hold your baby and keep it safe, so you need to be more aware, like when your baby comes out, to keep it safe. And I remember coming round in this point, and I remember looking at this doctor's balls and thinking, I'm gonna punch you in the balls. Like literally, if you tell me that one more time, I am gonna punch you in the balls. And then in my mind, I'm like, no, he'll kick me out. He won't let me give birth. Like it's so irrational was happening in my mind. And then there was this point, and I said, just tell me, like, is she coming? And they're like, we can see her. And I'm like, okay, let's just do this. And Elan was next to me. He could see everything. There was a doctor on my right. There was a nurse who was lovely. There was one nurse who was so nice. Like, I was looking around for eye contact, and the doctor looked at me almost with like disgust with what I tried to do. So they couldn't believe like what we were doing, basically, and almost like, this is why you don't do home births kind of thing. In my words
You were
break.
talking about eye contact, but I was just wondering, before you go back into the story, you haven't said if your water had broken yet or not.
I don't know. Like they did, because when she came out, she did it. She wasn't in her sack.
Yeah.
But it must have happened whilst I was there, and I didn't experience it. I didn't consciously feel it happen. Even noticing my mucus plug come out. Maybe, oh no, I did. This was at home though. This was when we were still at home, and it was so thick, and I was trying to pull it out. Like, I was trying to pull what was remaining. Yeah, it was so thick and bloody. Anyway, I can't really remember. That was very dark when I was giving birth at home. It was when I was in labor at home. It was very dark then. Everything is such a blur. When the moment she was coming out, when that came, it was like, I didn't need to push. And this whole thing that you need to push, like, I did not need to push, and I ignored the doctors telling me to, because when the moment came, it was more like a suck in, like the outside world, like the universe was sucking, like had the biggest hoover or vacuum over my vaginal opening, and they were sucking right out. That's what it was like. It was almost like I just had to surrender to that. And I did a little push, and then as soon as I did, like, I couldn't take that push back. It's not like I could retrieve it. It's like, once I said, okay, I'm just going to do a push, it was like, oh, thank you for that, and it pulled me along with it. And it just felt like everything was just moving down, like everything was getting sucked out. And it was such a, like, I could never describe what that feeling was, and I can't even fully remember it, but it happened 3 times, and then she came out. But it was such an out of body experience. But at the same time, I can remember everything about that room. Like, I was so aware about the space, about what happened. And then I saw her head. So first of all, because I crept up to have a look, and I saw her head. And then I did another push, and her shoulders came out, and then another push, and then she came out. And they put her on my chest straight away. And she stayed on my chest for like a minute or two. Maybe it was 5 minutes. And then they cut the umbilical cord, which I didn't want them to do, but they did wait, which was nice. And then they took her away. And it was funny because I really wanted her to stay with me. I didn't want her to have any medications. I didn't want her to be wiped down. I just wanted her to be on me. Like, she was fine. She was breathing. She was alive. Like, she'd just come out into the world, and I wanted to be on my chest. But they took her, and actually it was interesting for me because I think I had a big disconnect, because I felt like I let everyone down by going to the hospital, and all I wanted to do was to be with Elan and to go home. I had a lot of guilt about that, because I didn't feel that natural drawing to be with her. And that was something I had to work through to try to understand. And I think it was that disconnect, because I've been taken away from my body by these people telling me what to do and really overriding my experience. But then, so the beautiful thing about it was that Elan was allowed to be there to witness. If we'd gone in for a hospital birth at that time, he wouldn't have been able to come because of what the rules were.
Regulations, wasn't it?
Exactly.
So how did you get from the emergency room then to the maternity ward?
And then let me just tell you, when my placenta came out, it didn't come, they were pulling it. They started pushing on my uterus, and actually the doctor was pushing my uterus as I was giving birth. I just remembered that. That was so painful for him to push down on her, to push her out. And he also had his hands inside of me and was pulling, he was opening my vagina. So actually from him doing that, I tore, because he was pushing down, and Elan said he was putting a lot of pressure down. And then, so after it all, my placenta was, he was pushing on my uterus, he was putting his hands inside, and he was twisting the umbilical cord. And even though I told him to stop, he said, this is what has to happen. He was pulling my placenta out, and I could feel it like coming out of me. This was happening for like 30 minutes of him doing that. Then he got someone in, like a junior doctor, to come and stitch me up. And so I just had two men who I didn't know looking at my vulva and my tear, and him teaching him, this other guy, how to do it. And honestly, tearing was one of my worst fears, but I couldn't feel anything because I injected it. And I didn't give a shit at that point, like what, who could see what. It was only afterwards when I thought, wow, that should not happen, you know? And then I wanted to keep my placenta, and they were like, oh, it's medical waste, you can't keep it. And so Araya was on my belly, and then I had to go all the way. I had to go on a boat, on a speedboat across the water for half an hour with her on my chest. We got to the maternity clinic, and then I wish we just went to the ward, but actually I had to go and have another checkup where I got put into this cold room, white room, and in the middle. Have you ever played like Theme Hospital before? Have you seen Theme Hospital?
I think so.
It's like this game where like this is so clinical, and there's usually like a surgical table in the middle. And well, I used to play it when I was a kid, and it reminded me of it. So I got wheeled into this room. Araya got taken away from me and put into, like, you know, one of them little box things. There was a big bright light over her head, and same for me. And then this doctor said, open your legs. And I didn't want to. I was in so much pain, you know. And then he got two nurses to open my legs, pin them open, and I was crying. I was like, I don't want this. And then I said, I need to pee. Like, I really needed to pee. And she said, you pee on the bed. I'm like, I can't pee on the bed. Like, I would if I could, but I couldn't. And he said, fine, I'm going to put a catheter in. So he was threatening to put a catheter in me. And I was like, I do not want anything else inside me. And I said, I don't need to pee. So I denied myself of peeing just so I wouldn't have a catheter put in. And I was crying, and I could hear Araya crying. And I felt so like, oh, like I could not move. And then he took a swab and like the scissor things, where you pick the swab up, and he put it inside of me and put the swab inside of my uterus to clean it out, which is crazy. It does not need cleaning out. And this happened for a long time. Like, he did it like 3 times, and it was so painful. Like, I can't even explain. And then he did that. It's like doing like no eye contact, no nothing, no compassion. And I was really looking to like the nurse's eyes to be like, hey, please give me some support, like help me. And I couldn't do anything about it because I was so afraid of them taking Araya away from me, because I'd heard so many stories about how Costa Rican children, they're seen as property of Costa Rica. So I kind of was like, wanted to comply. And then they rolled me out, and I was looking through the doorway at Raya, and it was so horrible. I just wanted her back. And then I finally got her, and we got put into this little room. It wasn't even a room, it just had like curtains around us, and it was so cold. It was crazy. It was freezing, and I was covered in these, you know, the hospital blankets are like, they're just so shitty, aren't they? Itchy, shitty, like they're so pointless. And I realized the nurse came in and she said, have you breastfed yet? And I hadn't breastfed her. And then I felt this guilt, you know, like I haven't fed her. But luckily Araya took the breastfeeding really easily. And that was such a relief for me, because it was exactly what we both needed at that time, to have that connection. And then I just cuddled her up and kept her warm. And the nurse brought me something like, you know, like them packs of orange juice and a dry bag of crisps or something. It was just like so beyond what I would have hoped for after giving birth. And Elam wasn't there. Elam, we lost each other as we come on the boat there. They said he couldn't come in. And so I was alone through this whole thing, and I didn't even know how I would get him because I didn't have my phone. We didn't make an emergency bag, or he had the bag or something. And then he finally found us, and it was like, oh my gosh, like seeing him walk in, and that was the most, I felt safe when he came to the room. And it was the first time he then got to hold Araya. And I was so tired, and all I wanted to do was just like go home. I just wanted to escape and just go back to our home. But we couldn't, like I had to stay on the ward. So Elon had like an hour with us. And then we got put on this maternity ward, and actually that was kind of nice. It was like cozy, warm. There was a nice shower, like the food was fine. Like it was actually really nice on there.
Yeah.
It was needed that we had rest. Like it was actually that was welcomed, and it was so nice to just be in bed with Araya and cozy with her and getting to know her and just looking at her beautiful face and little fingers and toes and just thinking what has just happened to us, like what is the journey that you've just taken us on? And it's funny because it's so Araya's personality, like the whole thing that happened. Like, yeah, like of course she picked that, and someone said to me, like, the birth that we have is exactly what we need for
Yeah.
whatever reason. And I felt that with Araya. Like I felt she called it in or something, or I called it in, we did it together. But then when we went to leave, this was the thing, that there's a final thing, was when we went to leave the next day, so we landed to get an Airbnb close by, and we went to leave and they said, you can't leave because you didn't have any scans. You didn't have any ultrasound scans. And luckily I'd had one before I'd had like the awakening to business, like the business of birth. And so I was like, I have it. It's just on my computer. I didn't bring it with me because we came in an emergency. And they basically said, first of all, they said, yeah, you can leave. And so I was ready, packed, ready to go. I say packed, I didn't have anything with me really, to be honest. Just
But
like,
as soon as they say you can leave hospital, you want to do it that minute. You don't want to wait for the paperwork and the doctor to sign you off, do you?
no, I feel like it should be illegal for them to say, okay, you can go. It's like, let's do the documents and then say you can go.
Yeah.
Because there's like so much wait. There's hours sometimes.
Yeah.
And they were, oh my gosh. So I didn't have these documents that they wanted. And they were telling me that they needed to call social services because I hadn't been what's the word I'm looking for? Like we haven't been responsible, basically.
Yeah.
So that was calling for social services because we hadn't done it how they would want us to do it. So anyway, luckily I did have some documents from friends that Elan was like scanning me in. I can't remember how we even got them. And I was crying. I was like, I have to leave. And I think I was freaking all the other mums out as well in there. And I was like, I can't stay here. Like, you can't keep me prisoner in here. And I was just held Araya. And they even told me, like, you have to go and change back into your ward clothes because I'd got dressed and I was ready to go. And then it was that was a really bad feeling for me of like having to go back into this uniform in this prison. And I felt so disempowered and so lost and lonely and so afraid as well that she would get taken away from me. And then we finally got to go out. And it was so funny. The doctor was like, fine, you can go. And I'm like, are you kidding? Just like, fine, you can go. Like, you could have made that decision. And I walked down the corridor with this little baby, just with a blanket because we didn't have anything. And I'm walking on my own with my tear, just like, yeah, and these trousers, I had some trousers on that fit me when I was pregnant. Now I didn't have a belly. I had to tie a random piece of rope around my pants so they wouldn't fall down. I didn't have any knickers. So I was like, I made this makeshift pad and also tied it with a rope around the top. I don't know if you can imagine that. It's like something from the olden times. And then I finally made it to Elon. I saw him like walking down the corridor and it was like, oh my gosh, that relief from seeing him and just like having Araya. It was the most like, wow. I can't even describe in words how that felt to me after feeling like I'd just been in prison. And yeah, and then we finally started our journey home, but that journey home was not so simple. We had to take a taxi for an hour. We had to wait for a boat for an hour. We went on a boat for an hour or two. And then we got to the other side, had another drive for an hour, finally got home at nighttime. Oh, that feeling of being home. And I think Elon ordered us some food at that time, like from our favorite takeaway. So we had ribs or something like that, which I'd been eating my whole like pregnancy. It was just ribs. I just craved them. And it felt like none of it had happened. Like, once we got home, we put her in the car. We were like, now we have a baby. What's next? It was like the whole thing didn't happen. It was like a dream because we're back in the same place again, from where we left. And yeah, and that was it. And then I just realized, wow, this is the start of a journey for me to share more and understand more about physiological birth and how interventions and medical assistance can really get in the way and cause this. Like I would say I had birth trauma for a long time, which guided me to depths of motherhood to do that, to talk to other people who were awake and supporting mothers. And that was very healing for me, because I spoke to so many women, I had so many stories. And although like it's common, it's not normal, and there's so much of it's normalized, like so much of, oh, we'll just give some Pitocin, speed up the labor, let's induce you, let's give you a C-section, let me just open your legs and do this. There's no like, let's communicate, and what is it that you want? So yeah, it's like, it was the word that came through for me was humbling. Like the whole experience was humbling, because if I would have just had like the dream home birth, I probably would have been like, oh, there's nothing in this. I don't know what's everyone's big deal about giving birth. So I think it really just, it was that moments to help me see, oh, this is what it can be like. It can look so many ways.
And I think like having got to know you, and me and Danny, even though we're like different time zones, like never been in the same country, but we talk enough every single day through voice notes and things like that. And I know that you had this idea of what you wanted, and you had the birth pool ready and things like that. So I think for you to then not be having this home birth as you'd envisioned and dreamed of, to then all that trauma, I know afterwards it took quite a while to get little details from you about the birth, and you were very much, I need time to process. I think that was, for you, it took quite a lot of time for your body and your mind to kind of become one again, so you could understand what you've been through. And I honestly don't think you were ready before now to share the whole story. And I'm honoured that you've chosen me to share it with. I know it's not over yet, but I
Thanks,
think
Anna.
that you've needed this time, and to talk to all of these other mums to be able to understand what you went through.
Thank you. Oh, I feel like crying now. Yeah, it took me a while, like, because we've been saying why haven't we done this yet? But you're
Yeah,
right. It hasn't been the time. There's so many things I didn't understand until now. And I think every time, if I was to tell this story in 10 years, it would be different from the things that I've
yeah,
learned, the perspectives that I have on it. And yeah, I didn't share it for so long properly. And I avoided telling people about the hospital because I felt so ashamed of doing that. I felt like, why can't I do it? I felt like I'd let myself down, or my body down, or like my body let me down, or, like there was so much come through. And because my whole life I've been able to control everything, like I was always into fitness, I could do any sport or competition and do pretty well in it because I knew how to put my mind to it. And doing this and having to go to hospital was like shattering for me, because I had no control over what was happening. And
you
that
have
was,
to surrender to your body, and it's a hard thing to do.
yes, surrender, massive. Yeah, completely. So if it ever happens again, I'll definitely be having someone alongside. I think maybe I'll change my mind. I mean, Nina, I'll be flying you in.
Even just so I can be with it right, and you've got that. I'll just keep you
Oh my
occupied.
gosh. We'll just be sipping cacaos all the time. Like they'll
Yeah.
be like, okay, baby's coming. Okay, great. Let's have another cacao. See you soon.
I'll keep you chilled, and I'm very good at breathing. So, we're breathing through the
Yeah.
pain is one of my expertise.
Oh yeah. Well, that was one of the things that said keep me anchored, actually, was there was one breath. It was so simple. Elon just looked at me and said one, and I said one, and then he'd do two, and I'd say two. And whenever I was doing that and looking him in the eye, everything was fine. But then, as you'll know, with pain, like when the pain comes so intense, it's like hard to keep the anchor, isn't it? It's like
Yeah.
the anchor goes, and suddenly, like, it's like everything just like shatters everywhere, and you're like, how do I get the anchor back? Because I don't know where it's gone.
The
That's
brain,
what.
the pain, sorry, it literally takes your breath away. And something that I kind of do is I focus on breathing out, so your body then starts to like self-regulate, if that makes sense.
That is really interesting, actually, because you know what I found? My inhale breath caused me more pain. Like when I took an inhale, I couldn't take it deep enough, but because of that, I was focusing more on my inhale than my
Yeah,
exhale.
I
That's a
used to
really
do that a
cool.
lot. Yeah.
Oh,
And
I
that's
love
something that
that.
I've actually learned from you, is you would always say like kind of focus on your exhale breath. So yeah, just in case any mums out there find that bit of information useful.
Yeah, it's great though, because there's always that one tool that you're going to use. Like I had so many tools in my bag of what would have used. And that one was the breath. And it's funny what comes in them moments that you don't get to decide. It's just whatever your body feels like the most comfortable with.
And that Elan as well, that he remembered that tool and could, use that with you and say, look you in the eyes and just use
Yeah,
your
he had this
to each
he had
other.
this vision of like doing that and making me a coffee. It's fine. It's like I'll sip on coffee and count numbers. Yeah,
The
Rilan, let's do
cows, not
that.
coffees.
I know that's where he went wrong. That's where it all went wrong. He didn't
Yeah.
offer me a cacao. Oh, Nina, thank you for holding space for this. I'm sure like this will be like deeply healing beyond anything I can understand right now. I actually had one of Danielle, who I recorded a few weeks ago. I released an episode with her last, and she sent a message today just saying like, well, she did a post actually on our social media saying sharing her story has kind of like opened things up and sent things into a spin in a good way.
Yeah.
Just by being, honestly, it's the biggest gift to witness someone and listen to someone about their birthing story, because how often do you get that to do that, like to really just know you just have to share. That's it. You're just sharing what comes up, and there's no right or wrong. It just is. And like I said, every time you share something new will come up, like a new memory, like, oh, I forgot about that.
So how did you heal your tear in the end?
Oh, this was cool. So the 40 days after is a big thing of like 40 days after is going to be like what reflects the next 40 years of life. I held that in my mind. And even though for me, having a tear was one of my worst fears, it became my best friend, because every day I took 15 minutes to do a steam, and I had calendula and lavender, and I just put a pan in the toilet because I couldn't squat down. It was super painful. And for 50 minutes every day, I would just sit with the steamer and I would breathe and I would thank my body. And I did that for probably 6 weeks every day. And so not only did it help me to release any blood that was left in my uterus, but it just, and also to help it shrink back to size, but it also helped to heal the tear. So after, I would say 3 weeks, the tear, which had gone almost like halfway between my perineum and my vaginal opening, it had healed, and I started to do massage work on it too. And to be honest, the first time I looked in a mirror, I was like nearly sick because it was so different and it made me cringe seeing that. So I spent time looking in the mirror, and that created this like deeper connection with my body as well. And it's funny because doing these practices, it's not just about the physical healing that they do, but just taking that time dedicated to it was like did the deeper emotional like trauma release work for me. And so much can, like, because when you've got a newborn, 15 minutes is massive to have on your own, like 15 minutes now is massive to have on your own. So that was an amazing thing for me to try. And then I was concerned because I noticed like when I looked at my vulva, it looked so different. And I wondered if I'd had a prolapse, like it looked like it was all coming out. So I went to the gynecologist, and it was so funny. I went on the table and he's like, it looks beautiful. It's perfect. I'm like, oh, thank you. Okay. So like, even though like I'm not down for like these, you don't have to have these like checkups if you don't want, but it was just someone telling me that like, yeah,
It's
your
so
vulva and vagina looks perfect and beautiful. It's like, why, thank you.
sometimes it's just that reassurance, isn't it? It's that not that you imagine things to be wrong, but because things can go wrong in the back of your mind, you're like, okay, but what if?
And we're not around birth, right? We're not around birth. We don't, not, I know, I mean, I'm just saying I'm not around birth. I'm not around, like I hear stories, but physically I don't see births every day.
Yeah.
I don't, unless they're on Instagram. I'm not supporting women in postpartum. So for me, it's like completely new. And this is part of the world that we're in now, where we're not able to be in communities. I keep saying I mean I, and a lot of women that I know, it's not a common thing to be in communities, to be taking on the role as the doula or the midwife in a natural way. It's like we call them in or something like that. We pay someone to do it. But you know, when we used to be in communities where we would be watching our sisters give birth, we'd be watching our daughters give birth, and we would know what to do just because that's what the world we were brought into. So
we would have watched it and learned, and had that wise elder who would have said, right, if this
yes,
happens, you do this or this or this, and you would have learnt from one another.
exactly. I want to experience that in my time for
And
sure.
I know that was one thing that you struggled with, was your fourth trimester being alone, of not having, apart from Elan, obviously, not having that wider community and circle of friends and family around you, with just someone to bring you a hot meal, or just something like just to give you a hug. Just those little simple things, isn't it, that can make all the difference.
Like I was searching so much for community. It actually led me to lead a mother baby circle. It
Yeah.
was too soon, I think. It was like 5 weeks after she was born, but I needed it, you know, like there's something I needed from it. And it's so important to have community around. And, you know, like we had so many takeaways, which was amazing, but how nice would it be to just have that community where they knock on your door or leave something at the doorstep, you
Yeah.
know, like some food. But it was our choice. We decided to move away from everything. And so that was something I had to own as well. Like it was my responsibility to do that. And I think one of the things I'm most surprised about is everywhere we've gone, like I just presumed there would be that community there, you know, like I thought that would just be alive. And my hope is that these communities, these relationships between the maid and the mother and the elder, that they will start to be rekindled within communities. Because when the mother is the center of the community, the mother and babies, like things, they thrive, because that's where the life is coming in. Without the mothers, there's no next generation. And how we treat the mothers is reflected in the whole community, really.
So what is it that, you know, through this whole journey, what have you learned, and what would you tell your younger self?
Oh, great question, Nina. Love this one. All right, let me just go and see little Danny in my brain. Okay. I would probably say to her, first of all, you're amazing. You're going to do this. It's incredible. And you don't need to do this alone. You don't need to know everything. You can receive support. You can trust in other people. And you don't know everything, and that's okay. You don't know everything. You don't need to know everything, and that's okay. And
Surrender into your body.
surrendering to your body and receiving support. And actually, everything that you're going to go to is going to lead you to something beautiful, for sure. But definitely that thing, you don't have to know, you don't have to do everything. You can receive support. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
And she'd be like, whatever, I'm doing this alone. I'm going to learn everything myself. Who are you coming to visit me from my future? Like,
Honestly, like the amount of stuff that I've learned from you, it's amazing. It's just like osmosis, just like, yeah, just keep feeding it in.
yeah, sometimes it's like things are just meant to happen the way they're meant to happen because of the person that you are, and who else is in your like space of what they need to learn as well, because everyone's learning through sharing stories. So
Oh, 100%, yeah, definitely. No, it's just, thank you for sharing your story, and like I say, it's take the time, you know, to hold the space for this, you know, this huge part of your life, and like that you have gone from the maiden to the mother, and just take time, because, you know, as Daniela said last week, it's hopefully it'll be a similar thing for you, and you know, all these things that you've learned, it can now be absorbed, because I do feel that you needed this. So it's been what, like, so 23 months, you know, it's been a long time, but I think you've needed that to truly process everything that's happened, to heal, you know, mentally, physically, emotionally, from the trauma that you went through at the hospital, forcing themselves inside you. Like, did they want to ask for your consent? And And as well, it's, I know for you, you had the language barriers in France and in Costa Rica, but you know, so often even in like, you know, the UK here, it's that you get one doctor that thinks they know best and it's their way, and they don't, you know, you're the hysterical mum that's, you know, her hormones are taking over, and let the sensible doctor do the right thing. I'm glad that you've taken this time that you needed to fully absorb everything that went on. And yeah, thank you for sharing with me. It's been wonderful to hear the whole thing and not just little dribs and drabs. And I've got the photo of Araya on your chest with the Elan tech when you were in the cold room with the kid and partition. I had that image in my mind when you were talking about it. I remember you in the, is it salmon pink colour?
I think it was totally my color. I just want to say as well, like, even though I know I said I didn't have community, I didn't have physical community, but I don't know what I would have done if you weren't there, like, to support me every single day, like, to be able to share with you and know that you're listening to me and giving me support was just like, through that and through every single day, it's just been so healing for me. Like, I really honestly don't know what I would have done. So thank you, Lena. I love you.
I love you too.
Now we do virtual hugs, don't
I
we?
know.